So we've been raising Herdwick since 2012. We bought in 4 ewes that were 62.5% Herdwick and 2 rams that were 75% Herdwick. So we've been breeding those together and swapping out rams. We did one AI project about 4 years ago, and that brought us up to 85% Herdwick. She's about 77. We're in upstate New York, outside of Albany, in the town of East Bern, and we're known as Helder-Herdwyck Farm. And Herdwick are derived from the northwest area of England in Cumbria, or the Lake District. They are known to survive winters upwards of 3,000 feet in this fleece with no shelter. There's 4 different fibers in their fleece. There's wool, a guard hair, kemp, and a heterotypic fiber. The heterotypic fiber reacts to the environment they're in, and when they get too warm, they shed it out. They are born black in the spring, usually March, April. They're born a solid black. By August, their faces and legs have turned to white. So they look like, I call them a tuxedo sheep, because they're black-bodied with white legs and a face. Very sharp looking. We first discovered them through a PBS program about border collies. And I saw these black sheep running down the hills with these border collies and looked them up, and that's how I found them. And they'd been introduced, the genetics, in Oregon in 2007. The meat was Queen Elizabeth's favorite. Ours is very mild. In England, they refer to it as a very unique, strong-flavored meat, but they eat a completely different diet. I know I'm talking about the meat. They get basically sweet grasses on our land, legumes. They will browse if I let them into, we do rotational grazing. If I let them into a paddock that has some brush and clover, they will trample the clover to get to the brush. They prefer to chew on twigs, and they do very well on it. She's been on pasture. You can feel how round she is. I'm trying to think, what else is there about them? They're very friendly. She will have you pet her forever if you stop by our booth. Go say hi. Or she's missing April. Are there any questions in case something I missed?
Is there a reason that they're not 100%? Is there like an advantage to that, or there just aren't very many?
We're just breeding up to purebred. So there's no import of live animals. So the only way to have introduced the breed was to bring in frozen semen. So that's purebred 100%, and since there's no Herdwick in the US at the time, then it's 0. So 100 crossed with 0%, the lambs are 50%, and it works up from there. The original breeder used some 75% rams, so bred back out on occasion, because these are very closely bred, because they all go back to the same 2 rams that were introduced in 2007. Well, it's the same ram that we AI'd 4 years ago, was the last straws. 2 things I forgot. Beatrix Potter used to raise Herdwick sheep, and she bought up approximately 4,000 acres in farms, and when she passed, she bequeathed that land to the trust with the stipulation that the Herdwick flocks always remain on those lands. Like over in England, farmers change farms, but the sheep stay on the same land. In addition to Beatrix Potter, I don't know if any of you have read the book The Shepherd's Life by James Rebanks or A Pastoral Song. These are his sheep. And he met 2 of our sheep when he came over for one of his book signings. And it's his rams that were just collected and imported their genetics last June. So it's the first import in 14 years. Any questions? Yes?
Do they lamb out of pasture if you bring them in?
It depends on what time of year. So we put them back out on pasture the end of April, beginning of May. I prefer to try to lamb March, April because of flies. I don't want to get fly strike. I've had that. This is why we must shear sheep, and lambing late in the season, the flies actually go after the tail docks and the umbilical cords. If you don't catch it, that lamb's going to die fast. So I prefer to lamb in March. We have had them this year in May. We had some late lambing, and I would go out. Oh, well, she lambed, and it's up eating, unattended. They're great mothers, great lambers. They do wonderful.
Do they generally have one?
Generally. I do have twins, The higher percentage we're getting, they seem to be reverting to singles, but they're large singles, so they're good, excuse me, good strong lambs to start out. Purebred, the lambs are generally around 5 pounds. I've been getting, because of the crossbred, depending on which lines the ewes are out of, I've had 10, 12 pound lambs. And that's partially the forage that they're on. But we do graze beginning of May through last year, it was January, they were still out on pasture. If I don't have to bring in hay and feed them, I'm not going to do it. So if we don't have enough snow that would short out our electronet fence, we keep them out. They prefer it. They do better on it.
Do they require much vet care, or are they pretty self?
No. I really haven't had, we've been doing this since 2012. And when our numbers got large, we were up to 80, that's when we started seeing a few problems, but I'm told it will happen because you have a greater chance, not a chance, but a greater number, it'll start to show. Smaller numbers, we didn't have it. Anything else?
What do you use the wool for?
We get it processed. I don't shear. We hire a shearer. What are you doing? And we process it into roving bats or yarns. It's mainly used for outerwear or rugs in England, mattresses, chimney stoppers, anything that finer wools would not stand up to, the Herdwick will. So anything that's going to take wear, outerwear. I mentioned there were 4 fibers. It creates a coat on them that literally sheds snow and water. Shepherds over there, they'll say among all the hill breeds, the Herdwick dry off first after a storm because it just runs right off them. It felts great, so for fiber arts, it's awesome. The natural colors, I've got some samples of our yarn that's all a natural color if you want to see the different shades. My mill is good. If I don't have, before I was getting a lot of black lambs like they should be. We have one black sheep that is part Katahdin. So that black, the mill would blend in to make a darker gray for us, but now we're getting the darker gray. So each year they get a little bit lighter. She's going on 2. Anything else? Do you have any questions? Yes.
In A Shepherd's Life, James Rebanks describes using a kind of a coloring for
Oh, the rattle?
the rattle, yes, for showing them. And you know,
Okay.
he mentions it was a custom, doesn't say when it started, but I was somewhat curious about that.
Right. It probably goes way back to the first shepherds. They really don't know where they're derived from. They have traced them to Viking origins, but they're called a hill breed because they are literally let loose on the fells. They run all over, with the exception that they have a natural, it's called hefted. They always return to the same part of the mountain where they were born. So a ewe will go back to where she was born to lamb out her lambs. So they stay in the same vicinity. So when they send them out for breeding, they would color the rams and they could see the ram activity and see where they were. So what she's talking about, if you see online anywhere English shows of Herdwicks, the rams will be painted red down their back. And that's called a rattle. It's normally used on the ram's chest. So when they mount a ewe, you know which ewe has been bred. So when the cycle is up, which is about 16 days, they change the color. So if a ewe is marked twice, they know she's not going to lamb the first lambing section. So that gives you an idea when they're going to lamb. But it's a pasty paint mixed with oil, and they just rub it for the show ring. Only on the rams, not the ewes.
And it can, presumably it can be washed off.
It can. I haven't used it myself. I kind of have a pretty good idea. The rams are near my ewes, so they start cycling together more. So we tend to have a really fast and furious lambing. I wouldn't want to try it yet because I don't want to make the wool unusable. When we do butcher, we also harvest. Some of ours have curled horns. We harvest the horns, we harvest the hide. When they're lambing, if I have a ewe that has an excessive amount of milk, I will milk her out. They're not a dairy breed. Trust me, this is not fun. But I've got enough out of a ewe over a few days for making soap, and it's the best homemade soap you can use. Yeah.
How old are they before they can breed, and how long do they live?
I've got 2 that are 14 years old. I don't know if I'm going to expect them to go through another winter at their age. One of them has arthritis in her shoulder. They've lost all their front teeth. They're still fat out on forage, but when I bring them in with the cold, but I bred them up to the age of 12. That's one of the reasons they're not a commercial breed. They only generally single or twin, so they're not high producers, but they are best not bred the first fall. Other breeds can breed at 6 months, so she was not bred last year. She will be bred this year. So there's a whole year of raising them, which is why it's also more important if you can have them forage fed, it cuts down on the cost. If I don't have to buy hay and take it to them, I'd rather let them keep walking to their own food. It's more sustainable.
How old is she?
She's about 18 months. Yep. Yeah.
Do you know how long that's been in place that you can't have live animals in? Because of course they must have originally.
Yes, prior to 2001, the foot and mouth outbreak, that shut the doors. Yep, and that's been an issue even in getting more semen since 27. There was another outbreak of it between then and now. Blue tongue outbreaks and Schmallenberg virus, which causes abortions in ruminants. So if there's an outbreak over there, USDA shuts the doors. And that was one of the slow. The other thing is the original breeder, she would go, and since then she's tried several times before she gave up, actually a few years ago. She would pick out a ram and say, I want that ram put in for collection. Well, APHIS changed the rules, and the only semen they'll allow is from rams that have the highest scrapie resistance, which, if you know anything about genetics, is ARR for our strain of scrapie. So my husband and I footed the bill for the rams that did get collected. We tested 36 rams, and out of them only 6 had the proper scrapie resistance. So that was why she would put a ram in without having him tested for that. He'd get kicked out as soon as they tested him. So we tested before so we could find the rams to put in before we took on that expense. So that took a while. Anything else? Yes?
Do you breed or raise multiple breeds or just the
No, just the Herdwick. That's enough.
And why did you, out of all the options out there?
Well, I had raised Montadale Cross through 4-H and stuff, and they were getting bigger and bigger. So the show ring often dictates what size animals should be. They're not manageable out on the farm. And when I got to where I had even a Romney that was over my center of gravity, that's very dangerous. They can just step wrong and knock me over. I could get hurt. Plus, if you've got to try to flip them. I'm not going to actually flip her, but you twist them fast to flip them and sit. I can't do that with a 200-pound ewe, you know, and I've got 80. Am I going to have to do that to trim hoof? No. And it just got to where it was a little more dangerous and too much work to manage them. So that's when we found them. It was like, well, we had Romneys. They were getting kind of big too, but at the same time, everybody had Romneys at that time. So I couldn't sell my yarn, and I'm like, I just want something different. So it was meant to be. Found the program, watched the program. It bugged me for a year. What are Herdwick? I looked them up, found out the genetics were already here, and a year later we had our first flock. And I just like that they're more manageable. And we will be breeding always, even the association is going to dictate, we breed for the farm and handling and sustainability on the farm, not to the show ring. So you are not going to see Herdwick this tall. So they need to have smaller, more sustainable breeds again. They have less impact on their environment, and when I do have to feed them, I'm not feeding the ground underneath for that height, because you feed that, you're growing those legs. It works for some people, not me. I need an alternate.
Is she pretty much full grown?
No, they actually, I almost brought my 5-year-old. They actually grow for about 5 years to really fill out to their mature size. They are on the UK slow foods, and we're going to be trying to get them listed here. So it's worth the wait. We usually don't butcher our lambs till they're about a year old, 8 months to a year old, to let them fill out. And it's even better when they're 2 years old. I call it late lamb. They call it late lamb in England. So USDA says 14 months and then it's mutton. But Yep, we've butchered as old as a 6-year-old ram. There's no ram taste in them. But we do it, it's calm, quiet. We take them to the butcher. We're not chasing them or manhandling them. And I thank every single one I say goodbye to and thank their contribution.
Did you find that the phenomenal popularity of the James Rebanks book, did that add to the popularity of her?
It has, yeah. Yep, we get a lot of people, oh, it's James's. We got a lot of people that have no clue. And the other thing is Beatrix Potter, or people who have honeymooned in the Lake District. Oh, we saw those sheep over. So there's 3 ways they find us. So this is just her second show, and she's just not too used to having to stand around. But she'll be better after this.
Well, it's not easy being a glamorous.
No. It's the price you pay for beauty, sweetie. Any other questions?
Are any other sheep breeds likely to be hefted, or is it really unique?
There is at least one other, but I'm not positive who that is. And whether there's other breeds that are hefted that instinctively stay on their own area. Yeah. So what happens over there, a farm will sell some ewes to another farm like 20 miles away, and a couple will disappear. A few weeks later, they show up. It's kind of unique. Yeah. But during the foot and mouth outbreak, there's about 250,000 Herdwick were over there, and there's more than 10% of them were slaughtered. And the problem was there was only about 2,500 actual animals that were definitely diagnosed with foot and mouth. It was attempts to prevent spread, and there were over 1 million animals slaughtered just because. Now they overwinter rams, like this farm will keep their rams at that farm. So this farm's neighbor got diagnosed with foot and mouth. His whole flock is gone. Oh, on Thursday you went over there, that whole flock gone. It was horrendous. There's a book called To Bid Them Farewell. It's out of print, but if you can find it, it's well worth the read, because we need to learn from that how to handle any outbreaks. And with the amount of meats and stuff that are imported even here in the US, it could happen here. I mean, we have a lot of raw meat coming in from Brazil. There's foot and mouth in Brazil.
It can come from the raw meat.
Yeah. Yep. They've pretty much traced that is what happened in 2001. It was imported meat.
What happens with foot and mouth?
How would the meat get back to the...
How does it affect the animal, or how does it affect the person?
Okay, so that's okay. The spore or whatever it would be called that causes it gets somebody in the slaughterhouse, then goes home to their farm. And it was 2 animals went through, they call it a show and a sale. So they go through the show ring, and then they put them through the auction ring. And then every animal goes through that ring. So those first 2 animals went through, all those animals walked through that ring and then dispersed across the country. So foot and mouth is a very painful outbreak of blisters on the mouth and on the feet. So they can't eat, they can't drink, and it's very contagious. So it's a little bit different. Humans can get it, but it's a little bit different variant. Yeah.
Is it a virus or
I'd have to look exactly. Yeah.
for humans it's a virus?
Yeah. Probably it is. If anybody wants to touch her, I'll bring her around. If you have any questions, just holler. You know. Yes. What did you want to know? Oh, okay.
Just what it's like.
Sure. There's 4 fibers in it. There's a guard hair, wool, kemp, and a heterotypic fiber. And when it gets warmer, the heterotypic fiber reacts to their environment, and they shed it out. So the lambs that are born in March and April, by July when the temperatures are spiking, they're shedding out a long white fiber, and they start to grow it back the end of September.
And can you use that, or is it?
I spin it, I have it all spun together. Yep, and I've got samples in by our pen. Okay.
Hello, my sweet.
Whoop. Thank you. Her name is Lelia.
A couple that were older than 14 and that you weren't sure they were going to get to this next winter.
Right.
So then do you put them down or
Those two I will, because they're my two original ewes that have contributed so much to this herd. Yeah. Others we do mutton. And contrary to what people hear or tell about mutton, we prefer it to beef. It has to hang. That's because it's an older meat. There's a chemical reaction that happens in the meat. So as long as it's hung, it's like it melts in your mouth like butter. It's delicious and it's very nutritious.
Does it have less of this sort of gamey flavor? Or,
It does not. Nope. Nope.
because I've had mutton from sheep that was a heritage breed,
It-
and it's a very, very strong flavor.
It can depend on the breed.
Yeah.
It can depend on how it was handled, how it was butchered, and how long it was hung. So if they're stressed out, if you stress them out, they have an adrenaline burst that can cause off flavors in the meat. Yes?
What's the breed?
In this country, they're not even listed. Over there, there's so many, they're not of concern. They're on the list, but more like just a watch because of 2001. So because of the outbreak, that is one reason they've diversified them into England. Germany, Holland has some, and over here, just a way to, they realized all of them were in the Lake District. So if that disease had wiped them out, the breed would be gone. So since then, they've collected all kinds of semen and eggs and froze them, and they're sending them out. That's what I'm working at. Plus, I feel America needs another sustainable breed again. We've bred them all so big. Let's start out with an original. And I'm actually breeding them. They're getting smaller as they get closer to purebred. I know. She's actually about the size of an adult Herdwick ewe, purebred in England. You need to stop dancing. Yes, you do.
What is her size? What is her approximately?
Her approximate weight is probably, she's probably about 90. 80. But she's, again, only 18 months old. So they're described as a coffee table with a thick body and a leg at each corner like a coffee table. And I should have brought my other ewe because she stands like this. She's so wide. The chefs that we sell to love them. They said even though they're small, there's a higher meat to bone ratio on them. So they have less bone, their legs are shorter, but they're thicker with meat.
It looks like she has solid bone.
Mm-hmm.
You see some of them seem to be very, very fine.
Yes.
They look like they,
Tough. So their legs are much thicker. April is 4 years old, so her legs will get thicker too. And the feet are blocked. If you look at other breeds, they tend to have a longer fetlock, which is from the bottom of this bone to the top of their foot. They're blocky for climbing the hills, staying on the rocks.
And do you have to trim their hooves?
I do. This year, especially in the wet, they don't wear off at all because everything's been so wet. So she's been in the show ring in August. I've trimmed her feet 3 times since then. So they'll
Do you
be
do that with a file, or do you have to?
nippers. We clip them off. Yep. Right? She goes, yes, and I hate it. Anything else?
Talk about the history of the breed, like how old it is.
Well, okay, Herdwick, the name Herdwick is derived from the Old Norse word Herdwick, V-Y-C-K, which we took the Y-C-K and put in our farm name. That term means sheep pasture in Old Norse. Yes. And that is they're mentioned as early as the 12th century in writing, but before that, there's really no knowledge of where they're derived from. They're related to the pintail sheep of the northern sea region, like the Icelandic, Shetland, Finn, and there's connections with Vikings. So she has Lelia, it's a Norse name, They really don't know. It's just been raised on the fells for hundreds of years. There's some families, they can trace 400 years they've had Herdwick sheep. So how much further back they go, we don't know. Anything else? Anybody want to hold this crabby thing? She wants to go back to her buddy. Why don't you, if I sit, will you stand nice? Then will you? Will you? Mm-hmm. Not really. No, no treats. There. Okay. Anybody wants to feel her fleece, you're welcome to. She can object, it doesn't matter. This is her training.
How long is the wool? What's the state?
The longest I've had is about 7 inches. The old style can get as long as 10 in England. If they still have the old style Herdwick, it can be a 10-inch fleece. If we had that, we would shear twice a year, but we only shear once. Oh, stop.
Double coated?
Quadruple coated, 4 fibers. Yep.
So it's not just the top and the top.
Nope. She's like, well, this is better. This is a little better, Mom.
Yeah. Just chill. We're chill.
Yeah, you look much better when you can see who's touching you. Vet them first.
We have a shed in the winter that they're welcome to go in, and we'll look out, and they'll have 6 inches of snow on their back, standing out. They don't want to go in. It's too hot.
How do they do in the summer?
It's been tough, this heat. Yeah. So we make sure they have shade while they're out in pasture. Oh, stop. Stop. That's naughty. That's naughty. Yeah. Yeah. Shade and water, and they do okay.
When are they sheared?
In the spring. We generally shear about 3 weeks prior to when they're going to lamb, and we do all of their handling then, so we only have to bother them once in the spring. So they get dewormed, they get their feet trimmed, they get vaccinated, and they get their fleece off.
How's their parasite?
Very good. Yep. With the crossbreeds, I'm having to pick and trace the few that have recurring issues, and they get culled out. But she's been out on pasture. Fat.
And you don't supplement, it's just they're on all 50% grass?
The show sheep, we do supplement because of the stress of being on the road. We'll go on an individual basis, but rarely are we feeding grain. Rarely. It's not a normal diet for ruminants, so we try to exclude that. Our older girls, because they have no front teeth, so they get mash and yums. Right? Mm-hmm. Anything else? I think we're past our time, right? I hope. Is it 2:30 yet?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Stop in and see us if you have any other questions. That's what we're here for. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Say thank you. No. Yeah, right. Right.